I remember the exact moment she told me. We were standing in the kitchen, the early evening light pouring through the windows, casting long shadows across the tile. Her hands were trembling, clutching the little white stick like it was a piece of treasure, like it held a secret too big to say out loud. And then she looked up at me, tears already forming, and whispered, "I'm pregnant." Time froze. I blinked once, then twice, not because I didn't hear her, but because I needed to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Pregnant. That word hit me like a tidal wave. I remember my heart racing, my knees nearly giving out beneath me. I laughed, loud, joyful, disbelieving, and scooped her into my arms. We'd been trying for years, and nothing ever happened. We stopped talking about it eventually, but the hope never really died. And now, here it was. A miracle. We danced around the kitchen like kids. She cried against my chest, and I kissed her forehead, whispering, "We did it, baby. We really did it." I couldn't stop smiling. Everything finally felt right. That night I barely slept. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about tiny socks and midnight feedings and building a crib. I was already imagining what our child would look like, her eyes, maybe my chin, hopefully not my hairline. I was ready. I had to tell my parents. I couldn't wait. I knew they'd cry. My mom had wanted to be a grandmother for years. My dad always played the stoic type, but I knew he'd be proud. I called them the next morning and told them I was coming by. I didn't say why. I wanted to see their faces. The drive over was beautiful, the trees glowing in the late spring sun, and for once, I noticed. I had the windows down, music loud, heart full. I was rehearsing how I'd tell them in my head. You're going to be grandparents. Simple, classic, joyful. I even considered filming their reaction, but decided against it. Some things are too sacred for a camera. When I arrived, my mom hugged me a little too tightly, and my dad gave me the quiet nod of acknowledgement he always did. I sat them down in the living room, heart pounding. I couldn't stop smiling. "I have some big news," I said, my voice barely containing the excitement. "Really big." They waited, eyes wide. "Lena's pregnant." My mom gasped, hand flying to her mouth. My dad blinked, and then something strange passed over his face. He looked at my mom, and she looked back at him, and I noticed the joy didn't quite reach their eyes. "What?" I said, suddenly on edge. "What is it?" They didn't speak at first. My mom looked like she was about to say something but kept glancing at my dad like she needed permission. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Son, we're happy for you. We really are. But, are you sure the baby's yours?" I stared at him, stunned. What the hell kind of question is that? My mom spoke up gently. "Honey, it's just, you remember when you were 8? When you had that surgery after the accident?" I nodded, confused. I had fallen from a tree and spent a week in the hospital, but that had nothing to do with. "There were complications," she said. "Internal damage. The doctors told us, you might never be able to have children. That it was extremely unlikely." I laughed, because it was absurd. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because we thought maybe the doctors were wrong, but we also didn't want you growing up feeling broken," she said softly. "We wanted to protect you." "Protect me?" I nearly shouted. "You let me grow up thinking I was fine. That I was normal. We didn't want to define you by it," my dad added. "And we thought, if it ever mattered, you'd get tested, like any adult would. We didn't know it would come to this." I stood up, hands shaking. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. My whole life I believed I was capable of having a family. That maybe it just hadn't happened yet. That we just needed more time, more hope. But now everything was spinning. I stormed out without saying goodbye. I couldn't even look at them. I drove straight to a clinic and demanded a fertility test. The nurse looked surprised by my urgency, but she didn't ask questions. I sat in that cold room, my mind racing, thinking of Lena, of that little white stick, of her eyes when she told me. A few days later, I got the results. I wasn't fertile. Completely. No possibility. Not a low count. Not a maybe. A never. I remember just sitting in my car afterward, the envelope in my hand, staring out at nothing. It felt like I had been punched in the gut by the universe. Everything I believed about myself, about our miracle, shattered. And then the question started. Did she know? Was it someone else's baby? Had she cheated? I drove home in a daze. Lena was in the living room when I walked in, flipping through a baby book with a soft smile. When she saw my face, the smile vanished. "What's wrong?" she asked. I tossed the envelope on the coffee table. "I got tested." She didn't say anything. "I'm infertile, Lena," I said, my voice cracking. "I've always been. Since I was a kid." Still, silence. Then she looked down, closed the book, and whispered, "I know." My heart stopped. "You knew?" I asked, barely able to form the words. She nodded slowly, not meeting my eyes. "How?" I asked. "I found out," she said. "A few months ago. I saw your old medical records when I was organizing the attic. There was a letter from a pediatric specialist. I didn't mean to find it, but once I did, I couldn't unsee it." I sat down hard. "So the baby." "I didn't cheat," she said quickly. "I swear. I would never do that to you. I went to a clinic. I used a donor. Artificial insemination." My mouth went dry. "Without telling me." She burst into tears. "Because I was scared, okay? You wanted a child so badly. I didn't know how to tell you that you couldn't have one. I didn't want to break your heart. I thought if we had the baby, if you held him in your arms, none of it would matter." I couldn't breathe. My whole chest felt like it was caving in. "You lied to me," I whispered. "You made the biggest decision of our lives without me." "I did it for us," she sobbed. "Because I love you. Because I couldn't stand to see you crushed. We wanted a family. I made one happen. But it didn't feel like love. It felt like betrayal. It felt like the ground had opened beneath me and swallowed everything I thought I knew. And I hadn't even begun to understand how deep the cracks really ran. I didn't know where to go, so I just drove. No direction, no destination, just the road and my thoughts chasing me like a storm. The sun was setting, casting this eerie orange light across the sky, like even the world knew something had changed. My hands gripped the wheel too tightly, knuckles white, eyes blurry from everything I was trying not to feel. Betrayal. Confusion. Rage. And underneath it all, heartbreak. I stopped at a gas station 20 miles out of town. Sat there with the engine off, staring at the empty parking lot. A family walked out of the convenience store, father, mother, little girl holding a juice box, and I swear my chest cracked open. I wanted that. We wanted that. And now I didn't even know what we had anymore. My phone buzzed for the 5th time. Lena. Again. I didn't answer. Because what do you say to the woman who built your family without you? Eventually, I drove to a motel. I needed space. Just a few nights to breathe, to think. The walls were thin and the sheets smelled like detergent and old smoke, but it was quiet. And quiet was what I needed. That first night, I stared at the ceiling fan, wondering when everything stopped being real. Was it when she found that letter in the attic? Or was it earlier, when we stopped talking about the hard things? The next morning, I checked my phone. 14 missed calls. 6 texts. All from her. "Please talk to me. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you. You're still his father." That last one hit different. Still his father. It was strange, how something could feel so right and so wrong at the same time. I wanted to be this child's father. I'd already fallen in love with the idea of him. But how do you become a father to a child whose existence is built on a lie? How do you trust someone again after they've made a decision that changed your life forever, without even asking? I stayed away for 3 days. She didn't come looking for me, and I didn't want her to. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. But eventually, the silence grew too loud. So I went home. She was sitting on the couch when I walked in. Her eyes were red, and she looked like she hadn't slept. When she saw me, she stood up slowly, like she wasn't sure if I'd yell or cry or just walk back out the door. "I thought you might never come back," she said softly. "I wasn't sure I would either." There was a long pause. I didn't know how to start. She looked like a stranger, and yet, she was the woman I'd built my life with. The one I'd held through miscarriages, through job losses, through every moment that tested us. How could she do this? "You lied to me," I said finally, my voice shaking. "You made a choice that wasn't yours to make." "I know," she said, tears welling again. "And I'll regret it every day of my life. But please believe me, I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I love you." "That's not love, Lena," I snapped. "That's control. You made me believe in a miracle, in something that was never real." "It is real," she cried. "That baby is real. Our family is real. I carried him, I will raise him, and I wanted you to be his father from the beginning. I didn't know how to tell you couldn't give me that. I saw how it would break you, and I thought maybe if I made the pain go away, we could just move on. Start fresh. But you didn't take away the pain," I said, barely above a whisper. "You just delayed it. And now it's worse." We sat in silence for a long time. She cried quietly. I stared at the floor, wondering if anything could be salvaged from this wreckage. Then, in a voice so small I barely recognized it as mine, I asked, "Who is he?" She looked up, confused. "The donor," I said. "Who is he? Do you know?" She shook her head. "It was anonymous. I didn't want it to be someone we knew. I thought that would make it easier." I nodded slowly. That was something, I guess. At least it wasn't an affair. At least she hadn't lied that way. But still, it didn't erase the truth. This child, this family, it was all built on something I never agreed to. And that tore at something deep inside me. "I need to think," I said. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't even know if I should." She nodded through her tears. "I'll give you whatever time you need. But please, just don't shut me out completely. You're the only father this baby will ever know." I left again that night. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't trust myself to stay. The emotions were too big, too tangled. I needed clarity. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to see a therapist. I didn't want to sit on some couch and talk about my feelings, but I also didn't want to destroy what was left of my life out of pride and rage. And if I was ever going to be a father, even a flawed, wounded one, I needed to get right with myself first. The therapist's office was quiet and warm. She had kind eyes and didn't ask too many questions right away. I told her everything. The years of trying. The joy. The truth. The lie. And the child I didn't know how to love anymore. She let me talk for a long time. Then, when I finally stopped, she said, "Love doesn't always start with biology. Sometimes it starts with choice. This child didn't betray you. Your wife made a terrible decision, yes, but the child is innocent. If you can separate the two, maybe you can find your way forward." I didn't respond. But those words stayed with me. Over the next few weeks, I kept going. I wrote down my thoughts. I replayed everything. And finally, one afternoon, I found myself standing in the nursery. The walls were pale blue. A tiny giraffe sat in the corner. And in the middle of the room was the crib I had started building months ago, before any of this happened. I picked up the half-finished piece of woodwork. My hands knew what to do. My heart didn't. But I kept building anyway. That night, I called Lena. "I want to come home," I said. She didn't say anything for a second. I could hear her breathing. "Okay," she said finally. "Whenever you're ready." "I'm not ready," I admitted. "But I'm willing to try." That's all I could offer. But sometimes, willingness is the first step toward healing. When I walked back into the house, it was different. Not because the furniture had moved or the lighting had changed, but because I had changed. There was a tension in the air that wasn't there before. It wasn't sharp, not exactly, it was softer now, but still heavy, like a storm that had passed but left everything soaked. Lena greeted me at the door. She didn't rush to hug me or cry or say anything dramatic. She just looked at me, eyes full of quiet hope and guilt. I nodded slightly, stepping past her into the house that was still technically mine but no longer felt like it belonged to me. We didn't talk much that first night. I brought my duffel bag upstairs, and she followed me but didn't say a word. I slept in the guest room, and she didn't try to stop me. I appreciated that. The next morning, I heard her moving around in the kitchen. She'd made coffee. For a moment, everything felt almost normal. I took the mug she offered without a word, and we sat across from each other at the table like we used to, but now there was this vast silence between us that used to be filled with jokes and morning news and planning the day. Eventually, I broke the silence. "I don't know how to be okay with what you did," I said. "I know," she said. "I don't expect you to be." There was something in her eyes when she said that, a kind of sadness that wasn't asking for forgiveness, just understanding. And maybe that's what hit me the most. She wasn't trying to justify herself anymore. She'd stopped defending her choice. She was just being honest. And I needed honesty more than anything right now. We started talking in small doses. Not about the baby or the betrayal, not at first. We talked about groceries, about work, about her latest doctor's appointment. I listened without reacting, nodding when I needed to, even smiling once or twice when she made some nervous joke. It was mechanical, but it was a start. A few days later, I came home from work and found her sitting in the nursery again. She'd placed her hand gently on her belly, eyes closed, whispering something. I stood there in the hallway, watching. I didn't want to interrupt, but she must have heard me, because she turned and smiled. "Do you want to feel him kick?" she asked, her voice careful, like she was offering something sacred. I hesitated. Everything in me told me to stay detached, to protect myself. But my feet moved before my brain caught up, and suddenly I was kneeling beside her, my hand resting lightly on the roundness of her stomach. And then, there it was. A tiny flutter. Like a heartbeat from inside another world. I didn't say anything, but I felt something crack open inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling again, but it was different this time. The fan spun slowly above me, and I thought about that kick. That tiny, impossible reminder that life was happening whether I liked it or not. It wasn't his fault. The baby. He didn't lie to me. He didn't make a choice. He was just coming into the world like any of us, messy, unplanned, unwanted by some, deeply loved by others. I thought about what the therapist said. Love as a choice. And then I thought about my own father. Growing up, he wasn't the most emotional man. But he was present. He showed up. He fixed my bike when it broke, taught me how to shave, sat with me in the emergency room when I broke my arm in 9th grade. I couldn't even remember what he'd said most of the time, but I remembered that he was there. Wasn't that what mattered most? A few days later, Lena sat me down at the kitchen table again. She looked nervous, like she was about to break more bad news. "I want you to come with me to the next appointment," she said. My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because you're his father," she said simply. "And I want that to start now. I don't want to do this without you." It was the first time she'd said it without guilt or pleading. Just fact. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say yes. Part of me even needed to. But the fear was still there, lingering like smoke. "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted. She nodded. "That's okay. Just think about it." And I did. For 2 full days, I wrestled with it. I thought about what kind of man I wanted to be, what kind of father I could be. Not the biological one. But maybe, just maybe, the right one. So I went. The doctor was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a confident presence. She welcomed me like I belonged there, like she hadn't been briefed on the emotional landmine I was carrying in my chest. Lena reached for my hand during the ultrasound, and after a moment of hesitation, I let her hold it. And then there he was. On the screen. Tiny, wriggling, heart pounding like a drum. And something inside me just let go. I stared at that screen and felt tears burn the back of my eyes. I couldn't help it. All the confusion, the anger, the betrayal, it didn't disappear, not really, but it faded behind something bigger. Something undeniable. He was mine. Not because we shared DNA, but because I had decided he would be. Because I was choosing him. Right then. Right there. That night, I moved back into our bedroom. I didn't say anything about it, and neither did Lena. She just shifted to make room for me under the covers and rested her head near mine. There were no apologies, no promises. Just silence. But it felt like peace. And peace, after all we'd been through, was more than enough. A few weeks passed. We started taking walks together in the evenings again, like we used to before everything went wrong. We talked more. We laughed sometimes, even. The distance between us got smaller. Not gone, but smaller. And for the first time in months, I started to believe we might actually survive this. One night, I came home to find her painting a wall in the nursery. Wanted to change the color, she said, brushing a streak of light green across the wall. Blue felt too expected. I smiled. Green's nice. Feels like growth. She looked at me, surprised. Yeah. It does. I picked up a brush and started helping her, no words needed. We painted in silence, side by side, breathing in the new beginning we were building. And as the room filled with the scent of paint and the soft sound of our strokes across the wall, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. And sometimes, it starts with a brushstroke. The nursery started to feel like a symbol. Not just a room for a baby, but a space where we were repainting everything, our trust, our connection, our future. That soft green color we picked. It felt like breathing room. Every time I stepped in there, I remembered what I had chosen, to stay, to try, to become something new, even if it scared me to death. And God, it did scare me. One evening, after we'd finished assembling the crib, Lena and I sat on the floor, surrounded by packaging and leftover screws, laughing because we were both terrible at using Allen wrenches. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I let it happen. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. But I also couldn't ignore the thoughts creeping in like shadows. Who was the donor? She had said it was a clinic. That it was anonymous. But I had questions. Too many. And despite how far we'd come, I was afraid of asking them. What if she wasn't telling the full truth? What if there was more? It's strange how trust can feel solid one moment, then fragile as glass the next. Later that night, while Lena was asleep, I found myself sitting in the living room staring at the dim glow of my phone screen. I opened the browser. I typed in, how to track sperm donor identity. I wasn't proud of it. But I needed to know. Not to accuse her. Not to fight. But to fill the aching blank inside me that still whispered, you don't belong here. The next day, I sat across from her at breakfast, my stomach in knots. I want to ask you something, I said slowly. She looked up from her bowl of oatmeal, already sensing the shift in tone. Okay. This donor. Was it really anonymous? Her spoon paused midair. She set it down gently and sighed. Not in frustration. In fear. No, she said. And there it was. The truth, falling like a match into dry grass. My heart kicked hard in my chest. I wanted it to be. I meant for it to be, she said quickly, as if rushing to catch the fire before it spread. But the truth is, I didn't go through a clinic. I stared at her. Then what did you do? She swallowed hard, her eyes wet now. I reached out to someone. Online. It was a private arrangement. My mind spun. A stranger. She nodded slowly. We never met. It was just emails. He sent everything through a legal intermediary. There was a contract, but no names. I wanted to keep it clean. Professional. But technically, he's out there. I stood up, backing away from the table like it might explode. You lied again. I didn't lie, she said, standing too. I just didn't tell you everything. I was afraid if I gave you more details, it would just hurt you more. And maybe I was afraid you'd leave. I stared at her, the walls of the kitchen suddenly too close, too loud. This is leaving, Lena. Every time you kept a piece of the truth from me, you pushed me further out the door. She reached for me, but I stepped back. I need space, I said, my voice quieter now. I need time to figure out what this really means. She didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, biting her lip so hard it went white. I left the house and drove without knowing where I was going. I ended up at a little lake an hour outside the city. The kind of place we used to go camping back when life was simple and love was just a feeling, not a battlefield. I sat on a bench and tried to breathe, but my chest felt like a locked cage. The waves lapped at the shore. Families played nearby. Children laughed. I watched them with a strange ache in my throat. I thought of him. This boy I hadn't met yet. This child who would bear none of my blood, but all of my choices. And I wondered, what would I tell him one day? Would I tell him I ran when it got hard? That I walked away because his mother made decisions without me? Or would I tell him I stayed, even when it hurt, because love, real love, isn't about being right, but about being there? I drove home long after sunset. The house was dark. Lena had gone to bed. The next morning, she didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't cry. She just handed me a folded envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "I called the intermediary," she said. I asked if there was a way to access some basic medical records. "No names. Just genetic history. You said you wanted to know who he was, and while I can't give you a face, I can give you something." I took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a printout. No identifying details. Just medical facts. Height, weight, eye color. Family history. Education. Clean bill of health. I read it slowly. Then I read it again. He was average. Healthy. Normal. He liked literature and ran marathons. His grandfather had diabetes. That was it. There was nothing threatening about the page in my hand. No sign of anything sinister or dark. Just a man who made a decision. Like Lena did. Like I was trying to. "I don't want him to be a ghost in our house," I said softly. She looked at me, confused. "This man," I clarified. "He was a part of this. That's a fact. But I don't want him to live in our child's story like a shadow. I want us to raise him. I want us to be the story." She nodded slowly, tears brimming. That's all I ever wanted. That night, I sat in the nursery again, alone. I held the paper in my hand, folded it, and tucked it into a drawer. And then I did something I hadn't let myself do before. I talked to my son. Not out loud, just in my mind. Quietly. Like a prayer. I don't know how to be the perfect father. I don't know if I'll always get this right. But I promise you this, I will love you like you were my own, because you are. Not by blood, but by choice. And that's the kind of love that doesn't break when things get hard. That's the kind of love that builds a life. Outside the window, the stars blinked faintly. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. People think that love is a feeling. That it shows up like a wave, crashing in with passion and color, sweeping you off your feet. But standing there in that quiet nursery, I realized something that changed me. Love is not just a feeling. It's a choice. And choosing to be a father to a child that wasn't biologically mine, that was the hardest, rawest, most terrifying choice of all. But it was also the most honest. The days that followed were delicate. Lena and I didn't pretend like everything was perfect, because it wasn't. But we stopped circling the pain like it was something to avoid. We faced it, slowly, gently. Sometimes with words, sometimes in silence. And then came the doctor's appointment. It was the first one I agreed to go to since everything happened. Lena looked surprised when I said I wanted to come along, but I could see the relief in her eyes too. We sat together in that small, sterile room, surrounded by pastel posters and the faint smell of antiseptic. Her hand found mine on the armrest. I didn't pull away. The doctor came in, cheerful, kind-eyed, completely unaware of the storm we'd walked through to get here. She rubbed the gel on Lena's belly, turned the monitor, and said, "Let's take a look at your baby." And then I heard it. That sound. Thump thump, thump thump. It was so fast, like a bird's wings beating. The heartbeat. I stared at the screen. A tiny figure was taking shape, still small, still abstract, but alive. Moving. Real. And something inside me cracked wide open. I don't know how long I sat there holding Lena's hand, staring at that little form pulsing with life, but when I finally spoke, my voice was hoarse. "He's ours," I said. Lena turned to me, her eyes already full. "You really mean that?" "I do." And I did. In that moment, I meant it with every cell in my body. Not because the baby shared my DNA, he didn't, but because he would share my life. My heart. My name. My legacy. When we got home, Lena stepped into the bedroom to rest. I stayed in the hallway, pacing, thinking, heart still racing from what I'd just seen. Then my phone buzzed. It was my dad. I hesitated before answering. Things had been quiet between us since the day I found out the truth about my infertility. I hadn't called them back. I wasn't ready. But now, maybe I was. I picked up. "Hey," I said. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice, rougher than I remembered. "Hey, son." Another silence, the kind packed with everything we didn't know how to say. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, almost surprising myself. "We should." So that weekend, I drove back to their house. It felt different this time. Less like running from something, more like returning to something unfinished. Mom greeted me with a hug that lasted longer than usual. Dad stood back, hands in his pockets, looking nervous. Not something I was used to seeing on his face. We sat in the kitchen again. The same place where my entire world had cracked open just weeks ago. But now, something had shifted. I wasn't there to confront them. I was there to understand. "I need to ask you something," I said. "And I want the truth. No holding back this time." My dad nodded. "You deserve that. Why didn't you ever tell me I was infertile? Why wait until now?" He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You were just a kid when the accident happened. You barely understood what was going on. And when the doctor said there was damage, we thought maybe they were wrong. Maybe it would heal. But when the tests came back, confirming you'd likely never be able to have kids, we didn't know how to tell you. You could have told me when I was older." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But then you hit your teens, and we saw how much you loved life, how excited you got about the future. We didn't want to take that away from you. And by the time you got married, we just hoped it wouldn't come up. But it did," I said quietly. "I know. And I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have been braver." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not just my father, but a man. A man who had made a mistake. Who had been scared. Just like I had been. "I forgive you," I said. But I needed to hear this. I needed to know. He nodded. "You have every right to be angry. But you also have every right to move forward." That stuck with me. Every right to move forward. When I drove home that evening, I stopped by a baby store and picked up a tiny baseball glove. I don't know why, I just saw it and imagined myself tossing a ball in the yard one day with my son. It felt symbolic. A small promise to the future. When I walked in, Lena was in the kitchen, barefoot, hair messy, wearing one of my old shirts that barely fit around her growing belly. She looked up, and I saw that look again. The one that said, "Are we okay?" I handed her the glove. Thought he might need this one day. She smiled, holding it to her chest like it was a treasure. "I talked to my dad," I said. "And I think I understand now. Doesn't fix everything, but it helps." She nodded. "I'm glad." I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around her carefully. She smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. Like home. "We're going to be okay," I said. "Not perfect. Not easy. But okay. That night, we laid in bed facing each other. No screens, no distractions. Just us, like in the beginning. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? She asked softly. I thought about it for a while before answering. I used to. But now, no. Because if things had gone differently, maybe this baby wouldn't exist. And despite everything, I can't imagine not meeting him. She reached out, placed my hand on her belly. It was warm, alive. He kicked just then, like he knew. And in that moment, I knew, too. He wasn't a mistake. He wasn't a secret. He was a miracle. Life settled into a new kind of normal after that. Not the same as before, there was no going back to what we were, but something real started to take its place. Something deeper, built not on the illusion of perfection, but on honesty, forgiveness, and the quiet courage of moving forward. Lena and I went to more doctor appointments together. We started talking about names. We painted the nursery. It was blue at first, but Lena said it felt too obvious, so we went with a soft forest green. Neutral, peaceful. I started reading books about fatherhood. I'd never thought I'd need them. I used to think fatherhood was instinct, either you had it or you didn't, but now I understood that being a father had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice, effort, presence. Still, there was one thing I couldn't shake. One question that circled my mind at night when everything was quiet. One truth I hadn't yet asked for. Who was the donor? It shouldn't have mattered. Lena hadn't cheated. She'd done it clinically, legally, through a sperm bank. But my brain wouldn't let it go. There was a face, a name, a history behind the child growing inside her. And I didn't know it. Didn't choose it. And that gnawed at me. For a while, I didn't say anything. I told myself it would only complicate things. I was healing, we were getting better, and I didn't want to rip open another wound. But it festered. And one evening, while we were eating takeout on the couch, talking about baby monitors, I heard myself ask it out loud without even planning to. Do you know who the donor is? The silence that followed was instant and heavy. Lena put down her chopsticks. Her shoulders tensed, and her eyes stayed on the table. I knew this question would come eventually, she said quietly. I'm sorry, I added quickly. I didn't mean to ruin the night. I've been thinking about it. Wondering. She nodded slowly. I understand. I waited. She breathed out. I went through a clinic. I didn't pick someone I knew, if that's what you're asking. It was anonymous. All I got was a profile, medical history, education, personality traits. No names, no pictures. That helped. And it didn't. My chest felt tight. Can I see the profile? I asked. She looked up at me, eyes wide, surprised. You want to see it? I don't know, I said. Maybe. Just something to help me understand. She hesitated, then got up and walked to her desk drawer. She pulled out a small folder, worn at the corners. I hadn't known it existed. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it slowly, my hands a little shaky. Inside was a single printed sheet. Donor number 4627. He was healthy. Tall. Brown hair. Degree in engineering. Liked hiking, reading, volunteered at animal shelters. He sounded normal. Kind, even. And that made it worse somehow. He wasn't some distant medical instrument, he was a person. A man. A man who would never know his child, and yet who had helped create the child who would be my son. Do you think about him? I asked, not looking at her. No, she said, firmly. Not in that way. I chose a future, not a fantasy. You're the only father I ever wanted for this child. Her voice cracked a little on that last word, and I looked at her. She was crying, not loud, not messy. Just quiet tears, like she'd been holding them in a long time. I didn't want you to ever feel like you were second, she whispered. That's why I didn't tell you. I was afraid you'd see him in our child, not yourself. I reached for her hand. I get it now, I said. And I don't blame you. But I needed to face it. I needed to know what I was really stepping into. Not a story, not a guess, the truth. She nodded, squeezing my hand. Do you regret it? She asked. I didn't even hesitate. No, I said. Because if you hadn't done what you did, there wouldn't be a baby. And I wouldn't have the chance to be his dad. The days that followed were calmer. Something about that conversation, as hard as it was, brought us even closer. Like peeling off the last layer of fear that had lingered between us. There was no more hiding. No more questions unspoken. Then, one evening, while walking past the nursery, I paused. The crib was assembled. The tiny clothes were hung. There was a stuffed giraffe in the corner. And it hit me all over again. This was real. I was going to be a dad. And in that moment, I felt something strange. Not doubt. Not fear. Pride. I walked into the room and sat on the rocking chair. The one we'd put together on a lazy Sunday afternoon while laughing about how many screws were left over. I sat there, imagining the future. Teaching him to ride a bike. Walking him to school. Telling him stories at night when he can't sleep. I wanted that. More than anything. Later that night, Lena walked in and saw me sitting there in the dark. She leaned on the doorframe, her belly round, her face tired but peaceful. You okay? She asked. I smiled. Yeah. Just thinking. About what? About him. About how I already love him. She walked over and knelt next to me, resting her head on my knee. You're going to be the best dad, she said. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'm going to try. That's all any of us can do, she whispered. We sat there for a long time, wrapped in silence. The kind that's not empty but full, of love, of fear, of hope. And I realized something important. This wasn't the life I'd expected. It wasn't the version I'd imagined when we first talked about having kids. But maybe it was better. Because this version had been tested. Bent. Scarred. And still, it had survived. No, we had survived. And in just a few more weeks, our son would arrive. I didn't know exactly how I'd feel when I first held him. Whether I'd cry, or freeze, or just sit there staring at his face in disbelief. But I knew one thing for certain. I would be there. And I would love him with everything I had. No matter what. The night before our son was born, I couldn't sleep. Lena was already at the hospital, prepped for a planned C-section. Her blood pressure had been high the last couple weeks, and her doctor didn't want to take chances. I lay on the stiff pull-out cot next to her bed, staring at the speckled ceiling tiles, listening to the rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Every now and then, Lena would stir and smile at me, her face pale but calm. She was ready. I wasn't sure if I was. The truth is, part of me was still scared. Not of being a father, that fear had morphed into something else entirely. What I feared now was not being enough. That someday my son would look at me and see what I wasn't. That I wouldn't be able to give him answers when he started asking questions about where he came from. That he'd feel like a piece of his story was missing, and blame me for it. But in the quiet of that hospital room, I realized something. I might not be able to give him a genetic connection, but I could give him roots. I could give him love, stability, honesty. I could show up. Be present. Be his father in the way that mattered most. That morning, at 9:14 a.m., he came into the world. He didn't cry at first, just blinked up at the cold lights with wide, curious eyes. For a moment, time froze. And then the sound came. That tiny, trembly wail that split my chest wide open. Lena was groggy but smiling. Tears streamed down her face. Is he okay? She whispered. He's perfect, I said, my voice breaking. The nurse wrapped him in a blue blanket and placed him in my arms. I had never held anything so small. Or so heavy. He wasn't just a baby, he was a promise. A new beginning. A life that had somehow emerged from all our pain and struggle, and turned it into something pure. His eyes were dark, almost black, and his tiny hand curled around my finger instinctively. I felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't expected. Not fear. Not confusion. Ownership. Pride. Love. I wasn't borrowing someone else's child. He wasn't a placeholder or a product of compromise. He was mine. And in that moment, I knew I'd never again question what being a father meant. Later, after Lena had rested and the room had quieted down, I held him again. Just the two of us. The rain tapped gently against the window, the world beyond that glass moving on like it always had, but I was forever changed. "Hey there, buddy," I whispered. "It's me. Your dad." The words felt strange on my tongue. Heavy. Real. But right. "I'm not perfect," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've made a lot of mistakes. I didn't even know if I deserved to be your dad. But I promise you this, I will never let you wonder if you're loved." He stirred, his face twitching, and I smiled. "You'll hear a story one day," I said. "About how you came to be. About how we wanted you so badly, your mom had to go it alone to make it happen. And I might not be the man who gave you your DNA, but I'm the one who's gonna teach you to tie your shoes. I'm the one who's gonna tell you stories at bedtime and cheer for you at games and hold your hand when you're scared." I took a breath. "You're mine. And I'm yours. That's what matters." He let out a soft noise, something between a sigh and a yawn, and I swear it felt like an answer. When Lena woke, I handed him to her. She looked at him with such softness, such awe, that I knew right then, whatever pain we'd been through had been worth it. Every lie, every tear, every night I spent doubting everything had led to this. The next few weeks were a blur. Diapers, midnight feedings, barely any sleep. But also laughter. Wonder. The kind of joy that sneaks up on you in the smallest moments, like watching him grip my thumb while he slept, or hearing Lena hum to him while she rocked him gently by the window. We named him Owen. Simple. Strong. It felt right. There were moments when I'd catch myself studying his face, trying to guess what features might belong to the donor. But those thoughts faded quickly. Because no matter what his DNA said, when he smiled, I saw us. The us that fought through the storm. The us that chose each other, again and again. About 3 months in, Lena and I sat down to talk about how we'd tell him the truth one day. We both agreed he deserved to know. That secrets, even the well-meaning kind, had nearly torn us apart once before. "We'll tell him when he's old enough to understand," Lena said, holding my hand. "But not like it's a big reveal. Just part of his story." "Our story," I corrected softly. She nodded. And that was the thing. This story, the one I was once so afraid of, had become something beautiful. Not perfect. Not traditional. But full of meaning. Sometimes I'd get emails from the clinic, little health updates about the donor, anything legally required to be passed along. I didn't always read them. And when I did, I didn't feel threatened. The donor had helped me, become a father. That was something I could live with. Something I was even starting to feel grateful for. One evening, months later, I found myself rocking Owen to sleep. Lena was out with a friend for the first time since the birth. I was alone with my son, and he wouldn't settle. He was fussing, flailing, those little cries that tug at your heart and shred your nerves at the same time. I was tired. Worn out. But I looked down at his red, scrunched face and felt that wave rise up again, the same one I felt in the delivery room. The wave that said you are his father. He needs you. So I sang to him. Off-key, too slow, just the first lullaby that came to mind. And slowly, he settled. His body relaxed. His little chest rose and fell. And then he slept. That night, I wrote a letter. For him. For later. Maybe for when he's 16, or 20, or whenever he starts asking questions. It said, "Owen. You may wonder one day where you come from. You might even feel different. But I want you to know, there's not a day in this life when you haven't been mine. I didn't give you my genes. But I gave you something more, my heart, my time, my love, my whole world. You are not a mistake. You are not less. You are the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I will spend every day of my life showing you that being your father is the greatest gift I've ever received. Love. Dad. Because that's who I am now. Not because of biology. Not because of chance. But because I chose him. And every day, I'll choose him again.